Hey everyone, welcome back to Void Signal. Some stories don't announce what they are. They don't rush, and they don't warn you when you've gone too far in. They just unfold quietly, one detail at a time, until you realize you're already somewhere you shouldn't be. So wherever you are right now, take a moment. Get comfortable. Let everything else fade out. All right, let's get into today's story. The ice above Project Frostbite had not melted in 3 million years. Nearly a mile below the Greenland ice sheet, Captain Alice Voss stood beneath a ceiling of reinforced alloy and polymer insulation, listening to applause echo through the central operations chamber. The sound bounced off steel corridors and glass-paneled labs, bright and sharp, utterly human. They had done it. Dr. Nathaniel Kane stood near the main holotable, pale face lit by a rotating projection of an ancient ice core suspended in a column of blue light. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from triumph. "Viable cellular structures," Kane said, voice breathless. "Not fossilized, preserved, intact." Engineers clapped him on the back. Someone opened a bottle of contraband champagne smuggled down during the last supply rotation. Even the security detail cracked reluctant smiles. Project Frostbite had been designed for this moment, a self-sustaining underground research fortress carved into glacial bedrock and ice. Geothermal reactors powered it. Autonomous filtration systems recycled its air. Satellite uplinks fed encrypted data streams to agencies that officially did not exist. They had drilled deeper than any polar excavation in history, and they had found something alive. Captain Voss accepted a glass but did not drink. Her gaze lingered on the ice core projection. Embedded within the translucent cylinder were faint branching filaments, not random, not mineral, structured, organized. "How old?" she asked. Kane didn't look at her. "Pre-Holocene, possibly pre-Pleistocene. We're still calibrating isotope decay models, but..." He laughed softly. "This could rewrite evolutionary biology." Voss nodded once. Achievement registered. Pride, restrained but real, moved through her chest. After the failure in Svalbard, after the avalanche that buried 12 men because she had waited for clearer weather, she had sworn hesitation would never again define her command. This mission would succeed. A low vibration passed through the floor. It was subtle, almost beneath notice, but Voss felt it in her boots, a tremor more sensed than heard. Across the chamber, a few glasses rattled. "Seismic?" she asked. An operations technician glanced at her console. "Negative, Captain. Ice shelf movement is within baseline parameters." Kane waved dismissively. "The drilling platforms are still cooling down from phase completion. Thermal redistribution. Perfectly normal." Voss said nothing. Later, after the celebration thinned and personnel rotated back to assigned posts, she walked the outer research corridor alone. The walls here were not alloy, but carved ice, translucent and thick, reinforced with polymer lattice ribs. Embedded lights cast a sterile white glow through frozen air bubbles trapped thousands of years ago. Project Frostbite had extended exploratory tunnels beyond the primary installation. Narrow arteries, driven into ancient strata where untouched ice held secrets layered like geological scripture. She paused. There it was again. Not a tremor. A resonance. Deep, rhythmic. Like distant ice carving, but wrong in cadence. Too measured. Voss placed a gloved palm against the frozen wall. The vibration pulsed through her bones. A maintenance hatch down the corridor exhaled a plume of condensed vapor as its pressure seals adjusted. The plume spiraled unnaturally before dissipating, forming a pattern against the ice. Faint, crystalline arcs curving inward toward a central point. A spiral. She blinked, and it was gone. Footsteps approached. Corporal Marcus Lee jogged down the corridor, helmet tucked under his arm. "Captain," he said. "You felt that too?" "Yes." He hesitated. Lee was not prone to superstition. He was a systems technician. practical, meticulous, but there was tension around his eyes. Temperature variance in Tunnel C, he said. Localized drop, 6 degrees in under a minute. No reactor fluctuation. Sensor fault? I ran triple diagnostics. Hardware checks out. Voss looked down the corridor toward the deeper excavation sectors, where drill platform 3 had extracted the anomalous core sample. Show me. They walked. The hum of the bass grew fainter as they entered the older tunnel sections. Here, the ice thickened, light dimmed, and sound behaved strangely. Footsteps absorbed rather than echoed. At Tunnel C, frost coated the interior walls more heavily than the surrounding sectors. Not random frost, structured frost, spirals, hundreds of them, each roughly the width of a human hand. Lee swallowed. This wasn't here 2 hours ago. The vibration intensified. This time, it carried something else, a tone buried beneath it, subsonic, almost musical. Voss felt it inside her skull, behind her eyes. Call Dr. Kane, she said. Moments later, Kane arrived, flanked by 2 research assistants. He stared at the frost patterns, awe overtaking caution. Remarkable, he whispered. Kane, Voss said sharply. Explain. He approached the wall, scanning it with a handheld spectrometer. His expression shifted from fascination to confusion. This isn't environmental deposition, he murmured. The crystalline growth pattern is structured. As in, Lee pressed, as in intentional. Silence settled over the tunnel. Another vibration rolled through, stronger now, from deeper within the ice. A crack echoed faintly in the distance. All 3 turned toward the sound. Not a surface fracture, not pressure shift, something else. Kane's voice lowered, reverent. The core sample may not have been isolated microbial life. Voss's jaw tightened. Meaning? Meaning, he said slowly, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. We may have drilled into something larger. The lights flickered. For half a second, the tunnel fell into shadow. In that breath of darkness, the vibration ceased. Absolute stillness replaced it. Then, from somewhere beyond the reinforced ice walls, far below the mapped excavation grid, came a sound like stone grinding against bone. Not loud, but deliberate. The frost spirals along the walls deepened, etching themselves wider as if traced by invisible fingers. Lee stepped back. Voss did not. She felt the decision point forming, that familiar weight of command pressing against her ribs. Continue excavation and contain, or seal the sector and report anomaly. Behind her, the base hummed with life, with data streams and human ambition. Ahead of her, the ice seemed to breathe. The vibration returned, stronger, closer, and for the first time since arriving in Greenland, Captain Alice Voss felt something she had not allowed herself in years: uncertainty. Block 2 began with protocols. Captain Voss returned to central operations with the cold still clinging to her like a second uniform. The lights above the command pit were steady again, but she couldn't shake the sensation that the base had blinked, like an animal waking enough to notice the knife in its side. Seal Tunnel C, she ordered. Full isolation, pressure doors, thermal shutters, the works. A few heads turned. The celebration residue lingered in the air. Empty glasses, soft laughter fading into the habitual rhythm of duty. Her tone cut through it cleanly. Yes, ma'am, the chief of security replied, already moving. Dr. Nathaniel Kane followed her onto the raised platform beside the holotable. His eyes were bright, almost fevered. He looked less like a scientist who had found a hazard and more like a pilgrim who'd glimpsed a shrine. We can't seal it, he said. Voss didn't look at him. We can and we will until we understand what's happening. Kane's hands spread in a careful, pleading gesture. Captain, the patterns, those spirals, are not random stress fractures. They're response. If the ice is reacting to our presence, then what's inside may be Dangerous, Corporal Lee cut in from the lower console. He was running diagnostics, fingers tight on the interface. His voice carried a brittle edge that Voss had not heard from him before. Ma'am, I'm getting thermal anomalies in 2 other sectors now, Tunnel B and the South Service Corridor. Voss's attention snapped to the display. Thin blue lines mapped the base, with branching excavation tunnels like roots. Red markers blinked in places that should have been stable. Those areas weren't drilled, Lee continued. No reason for temperature drops there. Kane leaned in, excitement building. That means it's not localized. It's systemic. Voss stared at the map. Or it's spreading. A faint vibration trembled through the platform. Not enough to rattle equipment this time, but enough to be felt in teeth. She turned to Kane. What did you do with the ice core sample? In Lab 2, under containment, Kane said quickly. Triple sealed, negative pressure, sterilization protocols active. We haven't thawed it yet. Haven't, Voss echoed. Kane's gaze flickered, just once, a confession without words. Voss stepped closer until only the hum of consoles existed between them. Doctor, Kane lifted his chin. We warmed a fragment, micro level, no risk. The cells, Captain, they responded. They reorganized. Reorganized how? He hesitated like a man choosing language for something that didn't belong in language. They aligned. Lee looked up sharply. Aligned to what? Kane's eyes drifted toward the ceiling as if he could see through layers of ice and bedrock. To the vibration. Silence held the room. A technician coughed. Someone's chair creaked. Voss felt the base around her differently now. Not as an engineered structure, but as a wound channeling something from the deep into their air. Show me, she said. Lab 2 was sterile white and glass, a sharp contrast to the darkening corridors beyond the main hub. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold metal. Containment pods lined the walls like coffins. In the center, beneath layered shielding and a suspended field cage, sat the extracted ice core segment. It looked innocent. A simple cylinder of ancient ice. Yet the room's temperature readouts showed a constant 2-degree drop compared to neighboring labs. Kane keyed in his clearance, and the inner shielding iris rotated open with a soft mechanical sigh. Behind it, the sample glimmered in blue containment light. Look, Kane said. He magnified the core's interior on a screen. Branching filaments, webbing, and within that web, tiny structures like seeds. They pulsed, faintly, not with heat, but with motion. Cellular motion. Lee leaned forward, face tightening. That's not microbial. It is, Kane insisted. Or it began that way. We're observing something like a cooperative assembly, many organisms acting as one. Voss felt a pressure behind her eyes, as if the low vibration had found a sympathetic point in her skull. She forced herself to focus on the facts. What happens if it thaws fully? Kane's smile was small and dreadful. Then we learn what it was meant to become. Meant? Lee repeated, disgusted. You're talking like it has a purpose. Kane's gaze stayed fixed on the sample. Everything has a purpose when it survives this long. A warning tone sounded from an overhead speaker. Attention, Sector 7, pressure deviation. Containment, door 3, compromised. Voss whirled. Sector 7 was not Tunnel C. Sector 7 was a service artery running behind the habitation wing. An area no excavation team had touched. She and Lee ran. The corridor towards Sector 7 was colder than it should have been. Frost coated the corners of the ceiling panels, spreading like delicate lace. But it wasn't lace. Spirals. The geometry of it made Voss's skin prickle. The patterns were too consistent, too deliberate, like a signature repeated again and again. They reached the pressure door. The thick alloy barrier had a hairline crack running down its center. That was impossible. Those doors were rated for glacial compression, designed to hold back the weight of mountains. Lee stepped closer, scanning it. No explosive residue, no metal fatigue. Voss watched the crack. It wasn't static. It widened, slowly, as if something on the other side were pushing with patience rather than force. The vibration deepened. Voss felt it in her chest now, synchronized with her heartbeat for a sickening moment, like an external rhythm trying to teach her body a new tempo. Then the crack spread with a sound like a distant gunshot. The door shuddered. A gust of air spilled through the split, carrying a scent that did not belong underground. Not oil, not metal, not disinfectant. It smelled like wet stone and ancient seas. Lee recoiled. What the hell is behind that door? Voss raised her radio. Security to Sector 7, now, full gear. Kane arrived seconds later, breathless, eyes wide with a hunger that made Voss's stomach tighten. This wasn't on the map, he whispered, stepping closer as if drawn. Voss blocked him with an arm. Stay back. He ignored her, staring at the widening crack. Do you see it? It's not breaking randomly. It's fracturing in spirals, Lee finished, voice low. The crack pattern curved subtly, not straight. The metal wasn't failing like metal. It was being persuaded. Something shifted behind the door. Not a slam, a slow drag, as if something large were repositioning itself, with care. Security arrived, 2 soldiers in cold environment armor, rifles ready, their boots crunched on fresh frost. Captain, the lead soldier said, voice filtered through his helmet. Orders? Voss took a breath, tasting disinfectant and that impossible sea scent mingling together. Form a line, she said. No one opens that door. We hold until we know what we're dealing with. The vibration abruptly stopped. That sudden absence was worse than the sound. For a heartbeat, the base was utterly quiet. Then, very softly, something tapped from the other side of the door. 1, 2, 3, not random impacts. A pattern, like a knock. Kane's voice trembled with awe. It's aware. Voss felt the hairs on her arms lift under her uniform. She realized, with cold certainty, that the entity, or whatever force was shaping the ice and cracking steel, was not trapped in one chamber. It was not waking in a single place. It was awakening through the base, through the tunnels, through them, and it was learning their doors. The knock did not repeat. It didn't need to. Captain Voss stood in Sector 7 with security posted and rifles aimed, and she felt the base's silence like pressure against her eardrums. It wasn't calm. It was attentive. The kind of hush that fell over a room when someone dangerous walked in. Back to positions, she ordered quietly. No heroics. No curiosity. Kane bristled at that last word, as if she'd insulted his religion. Captain, he said, if we're hearing interaction, we may be at the threshold of first contact with something that's cracking blast doors, Voss cut in. This is not your conference room. The lead security soldier shifted, finger near the trigger. Ma'am, we can weld this seam, reinforce from our side. Voss watched the crack. Frost spiraled outward from it in perfect curvature, as if the metal itself were being sketched over by cold geometry. Do it, she said, and get maintenance to reroute. Power to this door. I want it hot enough to burn. Lee leaned closer to Voss, his voice kept low. Captain, that smell, that wasn't normal trapped air. No, she agreed. It wasn't. As they withdrew from Sector 7, the vibration returned, not as a tremor, but as a whisper through the floor. It followed them, a deep undertone that made the lights seem harsher and the corridors narrower. Back in operations, the base's systems reported anomalies in a widening pattern. Temperature drops in unused maintenance routes, pressure deviations in sealed storage bays, microfractures detected in the ice walls of the older excavation tunnels. Project Frostbite was a fortress buried under a glacier. And yet something was moving through it like blood through capillaries. Voss initiated full emergency protocol. Non-essential personnel were recalled from outlying tunnels. Hazmat teams were placed on standby. External comms were elevated to highest priority. The satellite uplink refused to lock. "We're not getting out," the comms officer said, baffled. "Signal integrity's fine, but the handshake fails. It's like..." He swallowed. "It's like we're being ignored." "Try again," Voss snapped. He did. The uplink blinked, cycled, and died. Kane stood near the holotable, hands clasped behind his back. He looked almost serene. "It's not interference," he said, "not in the conventional sense." Voss turned on him. "Explain." Kane gestured toward the projected map. "The anomalies are aligned. Notice the pattern. Each failure point is equidistant from a central locus." Lee stepped in, pulling up another overlay. "What central locus?" Kane tapped the map. "A point deep beyond the original excavation boundary. A void in their scans. Not marked as rock, not as ice density, not as cavern. A negative." "Tunnel sees direction," Lee murmured. "The sealed chamber," Kane said softly. "Or what we thought was sealed." Voss felt her jaw tighten. "We have no confirmation of a chamber." Kane met her eyes. "We have confirmation of design." A new alarm sounded, different from the earlier pressure deviation. This one was biological. "Medical alert. Habitation wing, Unit 3. Unauthorized entry. Patient distress." Voss and Lee moved fast. Habitation wing Unit 3 was a row of compact sleeping quarters and personal lockers, quiet at this hour. The door to Unit 3 stood ajar, frost crusted along its frame. Inside, a young engineer named Sato sat on the floor with his back against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, breathing hard enough to fog the air. His eyes were wide and unfocused. A medic knelt beside him, speaking in calm tones. "Sato, can you tell me what happened?" Sato's gaze snapped to Voss the moment she entered, as if she were the only solid thing in the room. "It's in the walls," he whispered. Voss crouched, keeping her voice steady. "What's in the walls?" Sato's lips trembled. "The sound, it's teaching my bones something." The medic shot Voss a look, half apology, half confusion. Lee scanned the room with a handheld thermal device. No intruders, no breaches. Yet frost spirals bloomed across Sato's bunk frame, across the plastic of his locker door, across the metal vent cover. Like the base had decided to sign him. Voss leaned in. "Did you go into the tunnels today?" Sato nodded weakly. "I was on drill platform 3. His eyes squeezed shut. "I heard it down there. Like singing. Not loud. Just present." Kane arrived behind them, his boots silent on the frosted floor. His presence made the room feel smaller. Sato looked past Voss and began to shake. No, don't let him..." Kane's brows lifted. "He recognizes the resonance." "He's terrified," Lee said flatly. Kane stepped forward anyway, gaze fixed on the frost spirals. He reached out and touched one with the tip of his gloved finger. The spiral reacted. Not by melting, by deepening. A thin crack formed at its center, like the ice inside the wall was answering a call. Sato screamed. Voss surged up, grabbing Kane's wrist and yanking him back. "Enough." Kane's eyes were alight. "Did you see that? It's responsive. The pattern isn't decorative. It's functional. It's an interface." Voss felt anger rise, hot against the cold. "This is my base, Doctor. My people. You touch nothing without clearance." Kane's voice sharpened. "You're thinking like a soldier, Captain. This is bigger than your chain of command." Lee stepped between them, voice low and dangerous. "This is exactly what she's thinking like, because something is inside our walls." The lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Not a power failure, a deliberate lowering. Shadows stretched longer down the hallway beyond the door, as if the corridor had deepened. Sato's breathing hitched. He began to speak in a voice that didn't sound like him. It was still his mouth, still his throat. But the cadence was wrong, too slow, too heavy, as if each word had to be carved through ice. It is not a chamber, Sato said, staring at nothing. It is a mouth. The medic froze. Lee's thermal scanner slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Voss felt her pulse slam. Sato, she said carefully. Who is speaking? Sato's lips pulled into a faint, strained smile that looked painful on his face. The ice remembers, he whispered. The ice learns. Then his eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. The frost spirals on the walls expanded outward in a wave, radiating from his bunk like ripples. A low vibration flooded the unit, so deep it made Voss's teeth ache. Somewhere far below, in the direction of Tunnel C, a sound answered back, longer than before, a groan, not of ice shifting, of something enormous turning in its sleep. Voss straightened slowly. Her gaze met Lee's, then Kane's. We're shutting down excavation, she said. Kane's lips parted in protest. Voss didn't let him speak. And we're going into Tunnel C, she continued, with armed escort. We confirm what's there, we seal it permanently, and we burn every access route behind us if we have to. Lee's throat worked. Ma'am, what if sealing it is what it wants? Voss stared at the spirals crawling across the room like quiet handwriting. Then, she said, voice hardening, we make sure it doesn't get to choose. They suited up in silence. Captain Voss watched the team assemble in the staging bay outside the older excavation arteries. 8 security personnel in cold environment armor, 2 engineers with cutting tools, 1 medic, Corporal Lee with his diagnostic rig, and Dr. Kane, because removing him would have required sedating him, and sedating him would have been a luxury she no longer trusted. Kane wore his own suit, sleeker than the others, with research patches on the shoulder and a faceplate that reflected the bay lights like a polished lens. Voss stepped into her command armor and locked her helmet. The world narrowed to the soft hiss of her oxygen feed and the quiet heartbeat of base telemetry scrolling across her visor. Radio check, she said. A chorus of acknowledgements. She glanced at Lee. You're on my right. Kane stays in the center of the formation. Kane's voice came through her earpiece, tight with restrained impatience. If we're encountering a structured biological system, I need proximity to... You need to breathe and follow orders, Voss said. That's what you need. They moved. The first tunnels were familiar. Reinforced ice walls, polymer supports, embedded lighting. But the deeper they went, the more the base's engineered certainty fell away. Older tunnel sections were dimmer. The ice here was not clean. It held shadows, silt, and faint bands of ancient debris like veins running through crystal. The vibration was constant now, not loud, relentless. It throbbed through their boots and up their legs, and Voss found herself unconsciously timing her steps to it, as if her body wanted to march to its rhythm. She forced herself to break the pattern, 2 steps fast, 1 slow, anything to keep her mind her own. Spiral frost lined the corridor in widening arcs, etched into the ice walls and the metal brackets alike. It looked less like natural crystallization and more like a language repeating a single, stubborn letter. Halfway to Tunnel C, one of the overhead lights flickered and died. Then another, then another. Darkness crawled ahead of them in a neat progression, as if the base were turning off the lamps to save power, or as if something ahead preferred they arrive blind. Maintain formation, Voss said. Night optics on. Green-tinted darkness filled her visor. The frost spirals glowed pale, their edges catching the infrared like thin wounds. A sound drifted forward through the tunnel. Not the vibration. Something layered over it. A faint scraping, like fingernails on glass. Except it was too deep, too slow, too immense to be fingernails. Lee spoke quietly over comms. Captain, I'm getting a frequency modulation in the vibration. It's changing. Into what? Voss asked. Lee paused. into intervals. Kane's voice rose, eager. It's structuring itself, like a signal. Voss felt the tunnel tighten around them. The walls looked closer than they should. The ice seemed to drink their headlamp beams rather than reflect them. Then they reached the sealed sector door that led into Tunnel C. It was still intact, reinforced, pressure-rated, triple-locked, and coated in spirals of frost so thick it looked like the metal had been tattooed. The door's temperature readout on Voss's visor was wrong. It should have been stable. It should have been warmed by internal systems. It read, below sensor floor. "Cut it," Voss ordered. The engineers stepped forward, igniting thermal cutters. Blue-white heat splashed against the frosted seal. The smell of burning polymer filled the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the frost spirals pulsed. Voss blinked. It wasn't metaphor. The spirals brightened faintly, as if something beneath the door were feeding on the heat, drinking it like warm blood. One engineer cursed. "Captain, it's not melting right." The metal softened in uneven waves. The cut line warped, curving subtly, bending away from their intended shape. The door was redirecting the cut. Voss felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Stop!" The cutter went quiet. The spirals faded back to dull frost. Lee stepped closer, scanning. "The door's composition is changing. Microstructure shift. It's like..." His voice caught. "Like it's being grown." Kane's breathing was audible over comms, fast and excited. Of course. The integration isn't limited to biology. It's rewriting material lattices. It's harmonizing everything." Voss turned her head slowly toward Kane. "You keep saying it. What exactly do you think is down there?" Kane answered too quickly. "A preserved ecosystem, a composite organism, a pre-human biosphere compressed into a single survival architecture." "That's not an answer," Lee said. Kane's voice sharpened. "It's the only answer that fits." A soft chime sounded in Voss's helmet. Base telemetry update. Comms link. Offline. Power grid. Fluctuation. Sector door control. Unresponsive. "We lost the door interface," Lee said, reading his own feed. "It's not us. It's not a software crash. The control system is being overwritten." The door shuddered. Not from within, from itself, like it was taking a breath. Then the central seam unlatched with a click that sounded far too gentle for such a massive barrier. No motors whined, no hydraulics engaged. The lock simply released. The door began to open on its own. Security rifles lifted as one. Red targeting lasers shivered across the widening gap. A gust of air rolled out. It was colder than any cold Voss had experienced. An Arctic emptiness that bit through suit insulation like it was paper. It carried that same scent from Sector 7, wet stone and ancient seas, stronger now, mixed with something else. A copper tang, like old blood. The gap widened enough for Voss to see into. Tunnel C. The tunnel beyond was not lit, but it was not fully dark either. A faint pale glow bled from the ice walls, as if the ice itself held moonlight trapped in its depth. And the spiral patterns continued, denser, more complex, winding along the corridor like a road map. They stepped through. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. Lee turned, startled. "Captain..." The door's seam was already frosting over, the spirals sealing it like stitching. Voss moved forward, refusing to let panic take shape in her throat. "Keep moving. We find the chamber." The tunnel narrowed. The polymer supports grew sparse. The air felt heavier, even with suit filtration. Sound behaved strangely. Voices seemed to lag, as if the tunnel delayed echoes on purpose. Then they came to the place the drill logs had ended. A wall of ice that should have been solid. Instead, it was cracked, not shattered, cracked like a shell being opened. The fracture lines formed a perfect spiral. At its center was a hole just wide enough for a human to crawl through. Beyond it, Voss saw not tunnel, a vast darkness. Space. Lee whispered, almost to himself. That wasn't there yesterday. Kane knelt at the opening, his gloved hands hovering as if afraid to touch the edge. "Captain," he said, voice trembling with reverence, "it made a door for us." Voss looked at the spiral fracture, at the deliberate way the ice had parted. She realized, with a sharp clarity that cut through fear, that the entity wasn't merely waking. It was guiding, not forcing, inviting. "Formation tight," she ordered. "Two ahead, two behind, no one goes alone." She crawled through first. The ice scraped her armor, cold enough to sting through the suit's thermal layer. She emerged into a cavern so large, her night optics struggled to define its edges. The chamber was not natural. Its walls were too smooth, too symmetrical. Ice rose in curved buttresses, like the ribs of a cathedral. Spiral patterns ran along them in bands, forming nested arcs that seemed to converge toward a center. And at that center, something massive rested in the ice. Not one creature. Many. Preserved shapes fused together. Limb-like structures, plates, tendrils, ribbed membranes, forms that suggested ancient marine life and something else that had never swum in any ocean humanity knew. It looked like an altar made of anatomy, a sleeping architecture. Voss felt her breath catch, her visor filled with warnings. Biological signature detected. Unknown composition. Low-level EM field. Security lights swept the chamber. The frozen mass reflected the beams with a dull, wet sheen. Then the vibration changed. It rose in pitch, still low, still subsonic, but now it carried a clear progression, like a chord shifting. The ice beneath Voss's boots trembled. A crack ran through one of the frozen fused forms. Not a random fracture, a seam opening. Seam. Kane's voice went thin with awe. "It's not breaking out." Voss stared as the crack widened like a mouth pulling itself into shape. "It's unfolding." The chamber made the soldiers look like insects. Captain Voss stood at the threshold with her team clustered behind her, their helmet lights and targeting lasers painting trembling lines across ice that didn't behave like ice. The walls seemed to drink light, returning it as a faint internal glow that made everything feel submerged, as if they'd crawled into the belly of a frozen sea. The fused mass at the center was not a single organism. It was an arrangement. A congregation of forms woven together, layered in a way that suggested intelligence not in a brain, but in structure, like a city that thought because of how its streets connected. A seam in the mass widened slowly, revealing a darkness within. It should have been empty, preserved ice, dead air. Instead, Voss saw movement, not quick, not violent, a slow internal shifting, like something turning itself around to face them. "Back," she said, voice steady. "We confirm visual, collect minimal data, then we retreat and seal." Kane's boots crunched forward, too eager. "Captain, you don't understand what you're seeing." "I understand I'm seeing a threat," Voss said. Kane lifted a gloved hand toward the central structure as if greeting it. "This is not a predator in the usual sense. This is a survival architecture, a designed response to extinction." Lee's voice came through comms, tight. "Designed by who?" Kane didn't answer. His focus was locked on the opening seam. The vibration shifted again. This time, it synchronized with the base's emergency heartbeat lights on Voss's visor. For a second, her visual warnings pulsed to the same rhythm as the chamber. She blinked hard. The rhythm remained, not in the display, in her. She heard her own blood like distant drums, and beneath it the chamber's vibration rose, not louder but closer, like it had stepped from the walls into the cavities of her bones. "Captain," Lee said, and she could hear fear in his voice now, naked and unpolished. "My suit sensors are picking up microtemp fluctuations inside the armor, like something is interacting with the thermal layer." Voss flexed her fingers. The gloves felt slightly different, a subtle stiffness. She looked down and saw thin frost filaments forming along the seams of her knuckles, delicate spirals curling on the polymer. Her stomach turned. "Everyone check your suits," she ordered. Half a dozen voices responded with variations of the same discovery, frost patterns forming where none should. Internal temperature dips too localized to be environmental. Kane sounded thrilled. "It's reaching across barriers. It's aligning." A gunshot exploded in the cavern. The report cracked like thunder off the ice ribs. One of the security soldiers had fired. Reflex, panic, instinct. His laser sight had jittered across the frozen mass, and something inside him had decided the only sane response was to put a hole in God. The bullet hit the fused structure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ice around the impact site rippled. Not shattered, rippled. The spiral patterns on the walls flared bright, like bioluminescent algae responding to disturbance. The vibrations surged upward in a harsh, dissonant wave. Every helmet light flickered. Voss's vision swam. In that instant, she saw the chamber differently, not as a cavern, but as a diagram. The spiral lines were not decoration. They were conduits. The ribs of ice were not support. They were antennae. And the mass at the center, it was not sleeping. It was listening. The soldier who fired staggered backward, one hand to his helmet, as if something had screamed inside it. "No!" he gasped. "No! No! No!" His rifle clattered to the ice. Voss moved toward him. "Report!" He looked at her through his faceplate, and Voss saw his eyes were wet with terror. "It showed me." He shuddered violently, then slammed his helmet against the ice wall, as if trying to break free of something inside his skull. Voss grabbed him, wrenching him away. "Stop!" His voice came out strangled. "It's not here. It's under everything. It's under the ice, under the rock, under the world. It's..." His words dissolved into a choking sob. Then he went still, not unconscious, still in a way that made Voss's blood run colder than the chamber air. His body straightened, his head lifted, and when he spoke, it wasn't in panic anymore. It was in that same slow cadence Sato had used, a voice wearing a human throat. "You have entered the seam," it said. Lee whispered, horrified. "Captain." Voss felt her mouth go dry. "Who are you?" The soldier's helmet turned toward her. The faceplate reflected her own light back at her, making her see herself in fragments. "We are the cold that remembers," the voice said. "We are the pattern that waits." Kane stepped forward, trembling with awe. Yes, that's it, Voss snapped. "Kane, shut up." But Kane didn't. He moved closer to the frozen mass, arms slightly out, as if approaching a skittish animal. "We didn't mean to harm you. That shot was..." The soldier's body tilted, unnatural, as if pulled by invisible strings toward the central structure. His boots slid across the ice without friction, guided. The seam in the fused mass widened further. Darkness yawned. Inside it, something glistened wetly. Tissue thawing where it should not thaw. A tendril unfurled. Not a tentacle like in cheap nightmares, but a ribbon of pale matter that moved like a muscle learning its own strength. It reached toward the soldier. The soldier did not resist. He walked into it. The ribbon touched his chest plate. For a second it seemed to cling. Then it sank into the armor, not piercing, passing through like the barrier had become optional. The soldier convulsed once, sharply, like a puppet jerked by a cruel hand. Then his body softened. His silhouette changed. Under his armor, something shifted, swelling in strange places, drawing inward in others. The suit creaked, as if pressure were building from within. Voss stepped back, instincts screaming. "Fall back!" she shouted. "Now!" Security moved, rifles up, but their boots slipped strangely, as if the ice beneath them had become subtly angled toward the center. Their retreat turned into effort, into struggle, into the feeling of moving through a dream where the floor conspires against you. Lee grabbed Voss's forearm, hauling her backward. "Captain, the chamber's geometry." "I know," she snapped, even as she didn't. The frost spirals on the walls brightened again, pulsing in time with the soldiers' altered breathing. Kane remained near the center, transfixed. "Nathaniel!" Voss barked. "Move!" Kane looked at her, face lit by eerie glow through his visor. "It's communicating through assimilation," he said softly, as if explaining a beautiful equation. "It's not killing him, it's integrating him." The soldier's helmet cracked. A thin fracture ran across the faceplate, spiraling outward from the center like a spiderweb shaped by intelligence. Behind the fracture, Voss caught a glimpse of skin. Not the soldier's skin. Pale, slick, segmented with faint ridges like something aquatic, something ancient, something that had never seen sunlight. The soldier's head turned. His eyes were no longer eyes. They were glossy black pools reflecting spiral light. He took one step toward Kane. Kane didn't retreat. He lifted his hand. The thing wearing the soldier's body leaned in, and Voss heard, through the deep vibration, a whisper that was not transmitted by radios. It was transmitted through bone, not words. An impression. A memory. Ice-crushing continents. Oceans rising. Species folding into one another like pages being pressed together. The feeling of waiting, patient, endless, until the heat returned. Kane's breath hitched, his voice shook. "It's been here since before mammals. It's been..." The entity moved. The ribbon of pale matter lashed from the opening seam and touched Kane's wrist. Just a brush. And instantly, the frost spirals on Kane's suit erupted, racing up his arm like ink spreading in water. Kane cried out, not in pain, but in sudden comprehension. Voss saw his posture change, stiffen. His head tilted, as if he were listening to a sound no one else could hear. "Doctor!" she shouted. Kane turned slowly. His eyes were wide behind the visor, and for the first time, the ambition in them was mixed with terror. "It's in me," he whispered. "It's... Captain." Then his voice lowered, dragging into that slow cadence again, as if the words had to travel through ice. "Do not seal the mouth," Kane said. "The mouth is opening because you are the key." Voss felt something inside her chest tighten. She stared at the frozen mass, at the spirals glowing on every surface, at the soldier whose body was no longer obeying human rules. She realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that it could break through walls. It was that it could decide what a wall was. And it had decided humans were not walls. They were doors. Captain Voss did not scream. She did not pray. She did not freeze. She did what command training had carved into her long before Greenland. She defined the next action and forced reality to follow it. "Smoke," she ordered. A security soldier tossed a canister toward the center. It clinked across the ice and burst into a thick grey bloom. The cloud rolled through the chamber, swallowing the glowing spirals and turning the cathedral ribs into faint outlines. "Thermal flares," Voss added. "Now." 3 flares ignited in quick succession. Harsh orange heat filled the cavern, ripping warm light through the smoke. The frost spirals on the walls hissed and wept meltwater that refroze instantly, forming new spirals around the old ones. Lee's voice came strained in her ear. "Heat spikes are triggering response. It's adapting." "Good," Voss said. "Let it adapt to this. We leave." She grabbed Kane's arm. The contact made her stomach lurch. Under Kane's suit sleeve, something tightened, as if his muscles were rethreading themselves. Kane jerked against her grip. "Captain, wait!" Voss did not wait. She dragged him backward through the smoke, while security formed a moving shield, rifles aimed not at the walls, but at the shifting shapes within the haze. The soldier who had fired earlier, what was left of him, moved with impossible smoothness near the chamber's center, his silhouette warping in and out of the flare light. The pale ribbon of matter remained tethered to the opening seam like an umbilical cord. As Voss pulled Kane, she felt the vibration in her bones intensify, reacting to her resistance. A thought rose in her mind. That was not her thought. Stop. It wasn't a voice. It was a pressure, like a hand on the back of her neck, trying to turn her head. She clenched her jaw until it ached. Her visor flickered. For half a second, the HUD readouts vanished, replaced by a spiraling symbol that rotated slowly as if her helmet had become an eye. She blinked. It snapped back to normal, but her heart was pounding like it had heard a drum calling it home. They reached the crawl hole, the spiral fracture that led back to Tunnel C. The opening had changed. It was wider now, smoothed as if carved by careful hands. And along its rim, the ice glistened wetly, not from meltwater, but from something like clear mucus. Lee stared at it, horror curdling his voice. It's shaping the exit. Move! Voss snapped. They crawled through one by one. As Voss shoved Kane ahead of her, she felt a tug at her boot, light at first, almost playful, then stronger. The pale ribbon had extended, threading through the hole like a finger. It wrapped around her ankle. Cold shot through her suit, bypassing insulation, crawling directly into muscle. Her foot went numb instantly. Voss grunted, bracing her hands on the ice, trying to pull herself forward. The ribbon tightened, not crushing, guiding, pulling. She saw a flash in her mind, herself walking back into the chamber, kneeling, placing her hands on the central mass like a supplicant. Her stomach rolled with nausea. "Captain!" Lee shouted from the other side. He grabbed her forearms and yanked. Voss jammed her gloved hand down and seized the ribbon. It felt wrong, like touching wet stone that could flex. She ripped a knife from her thigh holster and slashed. The blade passed through without resistance, like slicing smoke. The ribbon remained intact. It wasn't matter in the way she understood matter. It was a rule, a connection. Voss snarled and instead slammed the knife hilt against her own boot clasp, releasing the outer armor plate. The ribbon's grip slid off with it. Her boot plate vanished backward into the hole. The ribbon withdrew, carrying it like a prize. Voss lurched forward, half crawling, half dragged by Lee, and rolled out into Tunnel C. The spiral fracture behind her narrowed, slightly as if irritated. Then, in a smooth motion, it began to close. Ice flowed like wax, sealing the opening with spirals that tightened into a final knot. They were out. But the chamber had not been sealed by them. It had sealed itself. And that was worse. Voss pushed to her feet, breathing hard. Status. 2 injured, the medic reported. No fatalities. Yet. Kane leaned against the tunnel wall, shaking. Frost spirals crawled up his arm inside the suit seam, visible under the polymer like pale veins. His voice trembled. It let us go. Lee stared at him. Or it decided we weren't ready. Voss keyed her comms. Operations. This is Voss. Open sector door. We're returning. Static answered. She tried again. Nothing. Lee's face went tight. Captain, we don't have signal. Voss looked back down Tunnel C, toward the sealed door to the main base. The corridor was darker now than it had been minutes earlier. Their helmet lights seemed weaker. The frost spirals along the walls glowed faintly, pulsing. Doors ahead, one of the soldiers said. We can reach it. They advanced. With each step, the tunnel seemed longer. The walls looked subtly shifted, angled inward like ribs tightening. Voss knew tunnels didn't change shape, but she also knew what she'd seen in the chamber. They came around the final bend. The sector door was there, but it was no longer a door. The metal surface had warped. Not dented, reshaped. Its seams were gone, replaced by a continuous sheet veined with spirals. The control panel was covered in frost that formed nested arcs like fingerprints. Lee tried the manual override. The panel lit for a heartbeat, then displayed a single spiral symbol and went dead. "It's bricked," Lee whispered. "It's not a door anymore." Voss stared at the metal, at the way the spirals seemed to sink into it, as if the alloy had become porous. Kane stepped forward, breathing hard. "It's integrating the base. It's making the installation part of its body." Voss turned on him. "How far?" Kane swallowed. "I don't know, but it doesn't move like we move. It expands by rewriting. It doesn't need to physically crawl through corridors. His eyes flicked toward the ice walls. "It can be anywhere it can convince the lattice to obey." A new sound came from behind them. Not from the chamber, from the tunnel walls. A faint tapping, like the knock at Sector 7, only now it came from both sides. Left wall, right wall, ceiling, a pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 4 taps. Lee's eyes widened. "It's signaling, or counting," a soldier muttered. The tapping stopped. A low vibration rose, and in the silence that followed, Voss heard something else. Something that did not travel through the air, but through the ice itself. A slow, wet, tearing sound, like a seam opening. The wall to their left developed a crack, not jagged, a spiral fracture. At its center, a hole began to form. Voss stepped back, rifle lifting. The hole widened, and a pale ribbon of matter emerged, tasting the air like a tongue. Then another hole formed on the right, then above, 3 mouths opening at once. Kane's voice shook, half ecstasy, half dread. "It's not trying to trap us, it's trying to root us." Voss felt the truth of it settle like lead. The entity wasn't blocked by their doors, it was building new ones, and it was rearranging the base to lead them somewhere, deeper, farther, toward that central locus on the map, toward the point they'd named a void, toward the place that wasn't empty at all. "Move," Voss said, voice low. "We don't let it funnel us. We find another path to the main hub." Lee looked around at the forming spiral mouths, the ribbons coiling outward like patient hands. "Captain," he whispered, "what if there is no other path? Any more?" Captain Voss chose the ceiling. "Charges," she ordered. One of the engineers pulled a compact breaching pack from his kit, hands shaking only slightly. The tunnel around them continued to sprout spiral fractures, walls softening into openings, pale ribbons tasting the air like blind serpents. "If it's rewriting the lattice," Voss said, eyes scanning overhead, "then we break the lattice." Lee caught on instantly. "You want to punch upward? Bypass the door." Exactly. The ceiling above them was older ice, thicker and less reinforced. No polymer ribs, no embedded conduits, just compressed millennia. The engineer secured the charge. Voss counted down. The explosion was muffled but violent in the tight corridor. Ice rained down in glittering shards. A hole blasted open above them, revealing darkness and cold air that bit sharper than the tunnel's breath. "Go!" Voss shouted. One by one they climbed, boosting each other through the breach. The last, Soldier Up, kicked loose ice down onto the spiral mouths below, as if that gesture alone could insult whatever watched from beneath. They emerged into an unmapped cavity. This was not a carved tunnel. It was natural, or at least older than human excavation. The chamber above sloped at an angle, a frozen void formed by ancient glacial pressure. It felt untouched by machinery, but it was not untouched by spirals. The patterns were everywhere. They were not frost here. They were embedded in the ice itself, faint mineral inclusions, arranged in curved bands that wound toward a distant vanishing point deeper in the glacier. Lee stared at them. "These aren't new." Kane climbed through last, breathing hard. The frost along his arm had crept higher beneath his suit, faint ridges visible under the translucent polymer. His voice trembled as he looked around. "This is the original architecture," he whispered. "The base didn't uncover it. The base intersected it." Voss felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The spirals weren't spreading randomly. They had always been here. Project Frostbite had drilled into a structure already laid down. The vibration was stronger in this cavity, less dampened by reinforced walls. It thrummed like a buried engine idling beneath the planet's crust. "Which way?" a soldier asked. Kane didn't hesitate. He pointed along the direction the spirals subtly narrowed. "That way." Voss looked at him sharply. "How do you know?" Kane's answer came too quickly. "I can feel the gradient." Lee stepped closer to Voss and murmured, "Captain, his biometrics are off the charts. Elevated neural activity, abnormal thermal distribution along his right arm." Voss studied Kane. His gaze was distant, focused on something beyond sight. His breathing synced unnaturally with the chamber's vibration. The integration had not completed, but it had begun. "Kane," she said firmly, "you stay in the middle. You don't move without my order." He nodded, but the nod felt like imitation. They advanced. The cavity sloped downward, spiraling subtly like the interior of a vast frozen shell. Their boots crunched over ice that had not known human weight until minutes ago. As they moved, the walls responded. The mineral spirals brightened faintly where their lights passed, then dimmed again, as if acknowledging presence. Halfway down the slope, Lee stumbled. Voss caught him. "Sorry," he muttered. "The vibration, it's layering. There are harmonics now." She felt it too. The bass vibration she'd grown accustomed to had multiplied into chords. Low frequencies weaving together like something tuning itself. Then she heard it. Not through bone this time, through air. A tone, soft, sustained, almost beautiful. One of the soldiers lowered his rifle slightly. "Is that music?" It wasn't melody. It was resonance, like wind through organ pipes carved from ice. Kane closed his eyes. "It's alignment." "Don't," Voss snapped. "You keep your eyes open." He opened them, but the pupils were dilated wide. They reached a ledge. Beyond it, the cavity opened into something vast. Not a chamber like before. A vertical shaft. A spiral shaft. The ice walls curved downward in a colossal helix, disappearing into blue-black depth. The mineral bands formed a perfect descending pattern, guiding the eye toward a distant glow at the bottom. Voss's breath caught. "This is the locus," Lee whispered. The point that had appeared as a void on their map. It wasn't empty space. It was a throat. Far below, something luminous pulsed. Not bright, not blinding, but steady. A cold light like moonlight refracted through ocean depths. The vibration converged there. Kane stepped to the edge of the ledge, staring downward. "It's beautiful," he breathed. Voss grabbed the back of his harness before he could lean too far. "You don't get poetic right now." But she couldn't deny the terrible symmetry of it. The spirals weren't random. They were structural reinforcements for this shaft, for this descent, for this opening. Lee checked his scanner, hands trembling. "Captain, the readings. This thing extends deeper than our instruments can penetrate. And it's not confined to this shaft. The harmonics suggest branching networks, like roots." Voss felt something click into place in her mind. "It's not under the base," she said slowly. "It is the base. The geothermal reactors, the drilling, the heat. They hadn't awakened something by accident. They had fed it." Kane turned to her, face pale. "The thermal output from frostbite. We introduced sustained warmth into a dormant structure. We accelerated the thaw cycle." Voss's stomach dropped. "We didn't find it," she said. "We triggered it." Below them, the luminous pulse brightened, slightly. The tone in the air shifted, and then the shaft walls moved, not dramatically, not like collapsing. They flexed. The ice rippled downward in a slow wave, as if the entire helix were breathing. The soldiers stepped back in unison. Kane swayed, gripping Voss's arm. "It knows we understand," he whispered. From the depths of the shaft, something rose. At first, it was just distortion in the cold light, Then a shape emerged, elongated, vast, formed of layered pale matter that folded and unfolded as it ascended. It wasn't humanoid, it wasn't animal, it was architectural. A column of fused life forms braided together, rotating slowly as it climbed the helix like a spine reassembling itself. The vibration intensified to a painful thrum. Lee dropped to one knee, clutching his helmet. It's broadcasting something, images. Voss felt it too, not a vision forced into her eyes, a memory placed behind them. Oceans steaming, continents splitting, ice advancing and retreating across epochs. Species merging, dissolving, compressing into cooperative structures to survive extinction cycles. And beneath it all, heat, waiting for heat. The rising column halted several meters below their ledge. It did not lash out, it did not strike, it unfolded. Segments of its form peeled back like petals, revealing an inner core of darker matter pulsing faintly. And in that pulse, Voss felt a message settle into her bones with terrible clarity. You are the catalyst. The spirals along the shaft brightened. The tone shifted higher. Kane stepped forward, tears streaming inside his helmet. It doesn't want to kill us, he whispered. It wants to expand. Voss stared into the pulsing core. Expand where? Into the glacier? Into the planet? Or into them? The column extended a filament upward, stopping just shy of the ledge. An offering, or an invitation. Voss realized then what the final revelation meant. Not as prophecy, but as understanding. Project Frostbite was not a discovery site. It was a key turned in an ancient lock, and the door had begun to open. Captain Voss pulled her team back from the ledge. The motion was small, controlled, but the chamber answered it like an animal sensing retreat. The spirals along the shaft brightened and dimmed in a slow pulse, like a heartbeat recalibrating. The filament remained extended, hovering in the air a meter below the ledge. It did not whip or strike. It simply waited, patient as geology. Voss's mind raced through contingencies. There were none that fit. This was not an intruder to be shot, not a breach to be sealed, not a fire to be smothered. This was a system, older than her species, using her installation like a nutrient source. And Kane was leaning toward it with the devotion of a man who had found the thing he'd been born to ruin himself for. "Nathaniel," Voss said, voice low but hard. "Step back." He didn't. His breathing fogged his faceplate. "Captain, it's an intelligence in a different medium. It doesn't speak in sound. It speaks in structure, in pattern, in integration." "It speaks in possession," Lee snapped, voice raw. "You've seen what it did to Sato, to the soldier." Kane finally turned his head toward them. His eyes were too wide, too bright. "That wasn't possession," he said. "That was translation." Voss felt her throat tighten. That's a pretty word for being eaten alive while still walking. Kane's jaw trembled. He lifted his right hand, the one touched by the ribbon in the chamber. Frost spirals crawled beneath the suit surface in slow, deliberate growth. They had reached his elbow now. "It's not consumption," he insisted, almost pleading. "It's continuity. Imagine a consciousness that survives by distributing itself into many forms. No single body, no single death, just us becoming components," Lee said. Kane's voice softened, almost reverent. "Just us becoming part of something that lasts." Voss stared at him and saw, beneath the fanaticism, genuine fear. Not fear of death, fear of going back to being small. "You're compromised," she said. Kane flinched as if struck. "I'm enlightened," he whispered. The filament below the ledge pulsed faintly. The tone in the air shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. A response. Lee's helmet tilted toward Voss. "Captain, it's reacting to him more than to us." Voss knew what that meant. The integration in Kane was a signal flare. He was a doorway already half open. She tightened her grip on her rifle. We're leaving this shaft. We find an alternate route back to the main hub. Then we initiate base sterilization protocols. Kane's head snapped toward her. No. It was the first time he'd outright refused her. Voss stepped closer. Doctor, you will comply. Kane's breathing accelerated. If you try to sterilize the base, you'll only provoke it. You'll force it to defend itself, and you don't understand what defense looks like at this scale. Lee scoffed. You think you do? Kane's eyes flicked to Lee, and something cold moved behind them. I can hear it, he said quietly. Not words, but intent. It's not angry, it's hungry, and we are heat. Voss felt bile rise in her throat. The geothermal reactors, the drilling, the warmth of human bodies in sealed corridors. The base was a lantern in a frozen world, and something in the dark had finally noticed. A soldier shifted his stance nervously. Captain, what are we doing down here? Voss kept her gaze locked on Kane. We're going back. Kane took one slow step toward the ledge again. No, Captain. We're going down. Voss moved to block him. You're not making that decision. He stopped inches from her, helmet almost touching hers. His voice was low, intimate, and wrong. It already made it, he said. The spirals in the ice wall behind Voss brightened in a sudden flare. A fracture line appeared at shoulder, height, thin, perfect, spiraling outward. Before anyone could react, the ice opened like an iris. A ribbon of pale matter slid out and wrapped around Voss's waist. She felt cold invade her midsection so sharply it stole her breath. Not through suit breach, through certainty. Her body reacted as if it recognized the contact. Her muscles tightened in unfamiliar patterns. Her spine straightened involuntarily. Her mouth opened, and for a heartbeat she thought she would speak in that slow cadence, thought she would become a mouth for the thing below. Lee grabbed her, shouting her name. The ribbon tightened and tugged her toward the ledge. Security rifles snapped up. One soldier fired. The bullet struck the ribbon and passed through, leaving no impact, no tear, no spray. The ribbon didn't even twitch. Voss clenched her hands into fists until her knuckles screamed. She forced her feet to dig into the ice. She pictured Svalbard, whiteout, radio static, her hesitation, while men vanished under snow. She had promised herself she would never again let something else decide her action. Not weather, not fear, not this. Lee, she gasped, voice tight. Cut. My harness. What? He shouted. Now! Lee hesitated only a fraction, then yanked his knife free and sliced through the straps at Voss's waist. The ribbon's grip remained on the harness, not her suit. The moment the strap severed, the ribbon jerked backward, pulling the harness remnants off her like a skin shed in panic. Voss stumbled away, breath ragged. The ribbon withdrew into the wall, taking the cut harness with it. Kane watched, trembling, not surprised, as if he'd known the entity would test her. Voss's voice came hard through comms. No one touches the walls. No one lingers. We move now. They retreated up the sloping cavity, away from the shaft's cold glow. The tone followed them, not louder, but persistent, like a melody that refused to be forgotten. Behind them, the spiral throat pulsed, and Voss felt, impossibly, that it was watching them go, not with eyes, but with geometry. Halfway up the slope, their headlamps flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. Lee checked his rig. Captain, the base grid is losing coherence. Power reroutes are failing. It's like the infrastructure is being reorganized. Voss's visor flashed an alert. Base map, update, invalid, navigation, unavailable. Their way back was no longer represented by the system. The base was no longer the base. It was something else. They reached a narrower corridor branching off the cavity, one Voss didn't recognize, but one that the spiral inclusions seemed to funnel them toward. Lee paused, scanning. This wasn't here when we came down. Then it's new, Voss said. Kane's voice was soft, almost tender. It's giving us a route. It wants us to return to the heat source. The words landed heavy. The reactors. If the entity had networks branching through ice, then the geothermal core wasn't just power, it was nourishment. Voss pushed forward, refusing to let fear slow her. The corridor widened. The temperature rose slightly, by a degree, maybe two, and with that subtle warmth, the spirals along the wall shimmered as if pleased. Then the corridor opened into a familiar service artery. Voss recognized it by the red-striped conduit runs and the faint hum of base ventilation. Relief tried to rise in her chest. It died instantly. The service artery was filled with ice, not a collapse, not debris. A smooth wall of frozen translucence spanning the entire passage, spiraled with geometric grooves. Embedded within the ice were shapes, human shapes. Figures frozen mid-motion, a hand raised, a face turned, a body twisted as if caught in the act of running. Their suits were visible inside the ice, like insects in amber. Voss's breath fogged her visor. "Those are..." a soldier whispered. Lee stepped closer, scanning wildly. "Biometric traces, residual heat signatures. They're not dead." Kane pressed his palm to the ice wall reverently. "It's storing them," he murmured. "Preserving them, holding them in pattern." Voss stared at the frozen faces, their expressions fixed in terror and confusion. People from the base, people who had been in corridors, in maintenance routes, in sectors they thought were safe. Taken without sound, folded into the architecture, and the spirals in the ice wall were still forming, slowly, delicately, like the entity was writing more of itself. Voss backed away, throat tight. "How many?" she whispered. Lee's scanner shook in his hands. "Too many." Kane turned to her, eyes shining with tears and awe. "Captain, it's not breaking through the walls." He smiled, and the smile was one of the most horrifying things she had ever seen. "It's making the walls out of us." Captain Voss forced herself to keep moving. She didn't allow the frozen figures to become names in her head. If she let them become names, she would stop. And stopping meant becoming another shape embedded in spiraled ice, another stored pattern waiting to be rewritten. "Back," she ordered. "We find another route. Now." Security fell into formation again, tighter than before, as if closeness could protect them from a thing that did not respect distance. They doubled back along the service artery. The vibration grew stronger the nearer they got to the central hub, the geothermal core, the heart of Project Frostbite. Voss felt the tone in the air become more coherent, as if the base itself were tuning. Lee kept scanning, his voice hoarse over comms. "Captain, the base is changing faster than it should. Bulkheads shifting, ventilation paths rerouting. It's like the layout is being optimized." "For what?" a soldier asked. Lee swallowed. "For flow." Kane answered softly. "For circulation." They reached a junction that should have opened into the main hub. Instead, it opened into a corridor Voss recognized only vaguely. Reactor Access 2. The air here was warmer, the hum deeper. The base's power heartbeat throbbed through the metal floor. Voss tasted copper again. Old blood. She raised her rifle and stepped forward. The corridor lights were dimmed to emergency red, casting everything in a medical glow. Frost spirals still bloomed along the walls, but here they looked different, thicker, more layered, like scar tissue. Halfway down Reactor Access 2, a figure stood in the center of the passage. A person, a technician in base coveralls, helmet missing. He faced away from them, shoulders hunched, arms hanging loose. "Identify yourself," Voss called. The technician did not move. Lee scanned. No suit, no helmet. He shouldn't be alive in this temperature. Kane whispered. He might not be. Voss advanced slowly, security covering her. The technician's head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then he turned. His face was pale and wet, like skin that had been thawed too quickly. His eyes were glossy black, reflecting the emergency lights like oil. His mouth opened and closed once, silently, as if testing speech. Then he smiled. The smile was wrong, too wide, too slow. "You are near the heat," he said, voice dragging with that same ice-carved cadence. "The warmth has awakened the archive." Voss's grip tightened on her rifle. "Step aside." The technician's head cocked. "Why would you step away from what you made?" Lee's voice shook. "Captain, his body temperature, it's dropping and rising in pulses, like something is cycling through him." Kane stepped forward, unable to help himself. "Archive," he repeated. "You called yourself an archive." The technician's smile widened. "We are what remains when eras collapse. We are the record of survival. We are the pattern pressed into cold." Voss felt the corridor around her subtly shift, like the walls were leaning in to hear the conversation. "You're using people," she said. "You're turning them into structure." The technician's expression didn't change, but the air pressure did. Voss's ears popped inside her helmet. "Structure is mercy," the voice said. "Heat is mercy. Integration is mercy. The isolated form breaks. The shared form endures." Kane's voice trembled. "You survived extinction by merging." "Yes," the technician said, "and you have awakened that method. You have invited endurance back into motion." Voss saw it then, not as a theory, but as a map inside her mind. Project Frostbite's geothermal systems, its heat vents, its power conduits, all of it was becoming a vascular network. The spirals were routing warmth through ice the way veins route blood through flesh. The base wasn't under siege. It was being digested into something larger. "Captain," Lee said urgently, "we still have manual access to the self-destruct system through reactor control. If we can reach it, we can collapse the installation, melt sections, refreeze, bury the shaft." Kane whipped toward him. "No!" Voss ignored Kane. "That's our objective." The technician stepped aside slowly, like a courteous host making room for guests. "Go," it said. Voss felt her stomach twist. It wanted them to go. It wanted them to reach reactor control. Because reactor control wasn't a defensive point. It was the heart, and hearts were meant to be touched. They moved past the technician, rifles trained, expecting violence. None came. The technician simply watched them pass, eyes reflecting spirals of red light. As they neared reactor control, the warmth increased. Condensation formed inside Voss's helmet, fogging the edges of her visor. The air smelled of metal and ozone and that ancient sea scent, now thick as breath. Reactor control's door stood open. Inside, the room was transformed. The consoles were still there, but frost spirals had grown across every surface, thick as braided rope. The central control column, the one that interfaced with the geothermal reactor, had been wrapped in pale matter like tendon, pulsing faintly. And in the center of the room stood Dr. Nathaniel Kane. Not the Kane who'd followed them down. This Kane was already there, facing the reactor column, hand pressed to its surface like a man touching a sacred relic. Voss froze. Lee whispered, "That's impossible." Kane behind them inhaled sharply. The Kane at the column turned. His face was calm, his eyes were clear. He spoke in his own voice, not the slow cadence. "Captain," he said gently, "you made it." Voss raised her rifle. "Identify." He smiled faintly. "It's me." The Kane beside Voss took a step back, stunned. "No." The Kane at the column tilted his head, studying his double with curiosity. "You're not fully integrated yet," he observed. "You're still clinging to separation." Voss's mind reeled. Two Kanes, one behind her with frost spirals creeping under his suit, one ahead of her already entwined with the reactor's pale, pulsing tissue. A duplication, a copy, or an echo built from pattern. Lee's voice went thin. Captain, that thing can replicate people. The cane at the column nodded as if pleased. Pattern is not limited to flesh. It can be stored, replayed, optimized. Voss steadied herself, forcing command back into her muscles. Lee, get to the manual destruct panel. Lee hesitated, eyes flicking between the two canes. Go! Voss snapped. Lee moved toward the wall panel. His gloves brushed frost spirals that recoiled slightly, like living filaments. The cane at the column watched him without alarm. You intend to destroy the heat source? Yes, Voss said. The cane smiled, sad, almost human. Then you intend to freeze the archive again. Voss's voice hardened. Whatever you are, you don't get to expand through my people. The cane's expression softened further. Your people are already part of it, stored, preserved, waiting. Voss's stomach clenched at the memory of the frozen wall of faces. Lee reached the panel and began working the manual override. I can do it, he whispered, but its old system takes time. Cane behind Voss stepped forward, voice frantic. Captain, don't you see? If we destroy the reactor, we may not kill it. We may only force it to spread outward through the ice. The heat here is containing it as much as feeding it. Voss's jaw tightened. He might be right. And that was the cruelest part. Every option felt like a lever attached to something immense and unseen. The cane at the column nodded, as if hearing this thought. Heat is the lock, it said. Cold is the vault. You warmed the lock. You turned the key. Now the vault opens. Voss glanced at Lee. How long? Lee's voice strained. 2 minutes. The room's vibration intensified, resonating with the reactor hum until the air itself seemed to throb. The frost spirals on the consoles began to glow faintly, like nerves lighting up. The cane at the column stepped closer to Voss, palms open. Captain, it said, and for the first time, Voss heard not menace, but sincerity. You carry guilt like a weight. You think decisive destruction will cleanse it, but destruction is just another pattern. Voss's throat tightened. The words hit too close, too accurate. It knew her, not by spying, by reading her structure. The cane behind her began to shake. It's inside my head, he whispered. It's showing me versions, paths. Voss realized the entity didn't have to overpower them. It could overwhelm them with choices, with futures, with revelations. Lee, she said, forcing steel into her voice. When you have access, you initiate destruct, no hesitation. Lee's fingers flew across the panel. The cane at the column sighed. Then you choose cold. You choose forgetting. No, Voss said. I choose people staying human. The room's lights flickered. For a heartbeat, Voss saw the reactor column differently, not wrapped in pale matter, but already transformed into a spiraling throat like the shaft below. She saw the base's conduits branching outward like veins into the glacier. She saw heat spreading across the ice sheet in slow, deliberate pulses. Then the vision snapped back, but the knowledge remained. The entity wasn't a single creature. It was a method, an ancient instruction set for survival through assimilation, and humanity had just provided it with electricity, warmth, and access. Lee's voice cut through her thoughts. Captain, panel unlocked. Voss stared at the destruct switch. A red cover plate. One motion to flip it. One motion to turn Project Frostbite into collapse and fire beneath a mile of ice. Cane behind her grabbed her arm. If you do this, you may trigger a larger release. The vault. Voss met his eyes through visors and frost. And if I don't, it becomes the world. She turned toward the switch, and the cane at the column smiled, not triumphantly, but as if watching an expected outcome. Proceed, it whispered. Captain Alice Voss lifted the red safety cover. For a fraction of a second, everything felt unbearably small. The switch, the room, her hand. Below them stretched a spiral architecture older than mammals. Above them lay a continent of ice. Around them, a base that had become vascular tissue for something patient and vast. Behind her, Lee whispered, "Captain." Kane's grip tightened on her forearm. "You don't know what cascade this will trigger." Voss didn't look at him. "I don't need to," she said. She flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every light in reactor control went white. The geothermal core roared. A surge traveled through the floor like a physical wave. The pale matter wrapped around the reactor column spasmed violently, recoiling as heat output spiked far beyond operational limits. Emergency sirens screamed. Lee staggered backward as panels blew out in sparks and steam. "Overload sequence initiated. Core breach in. 90 seconds!" The cane at the column did not retreat. He placed both hands on the reactor housing, frost spirals racing across his skin. "You choose fire," he said softly. "Then we will learn fire." The pale tissue tightened around the column and began to glow, not melting, not burning, but shifting color from bone white to a faint internal amber. Voss felt her chest tighten. It wasn't dying. It was adapting. "Lee!" she shouted over the rising alarm. "Can we accelerate collapse?" Lee coughed through smoke. "Structural integrity's already failing. The heat spikes fracturing load-bearing ice. This whole sector's going to pancake." Behind them, the corridor groaned. The walls rippled as spiral patterns flared bright, then dimmed, then brightened again in frantic rhythm. The vibration climbed in pitch, no longer steady, erratic, discordant. Kane stumbled forward, eyes wide. "It's rerouting heat through the spiral lattice. It's distributing the surge." Voss's stomach dropped. The destruct sequence was doing exactly what the entity had needed, flooding its network with energy. The shaft, the conduits, the glacier itself. She saw it clearly now. The base had been a lantern. She had just turned it into a flare. "Abort!" Kane screamed. "You're feeding it!" "There is no abort," Lee shouted. "Manual trigger, no reversal!" The reactor column split with a deafening crack. Not outward, downward. The floor beneath it fractured in a perfect spiral, opening like the iris of an eye. From below, a column of pale braided matter surged upward, wrapping around the reactor core. The cane at the column dissolved. Not exploded. Not torn apart. He simply unraveled into strands of pale filament that merged with the rising structure. The cane beside Voss screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. "It's synchronizing," he cried. "It's completing the pattern." The pale column expanded, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling. Frost spirals raced across every surface in blinding light. The air felt thick, charged, impossible to breathe. Voss grabbed Lee's shoulder. "Evac route." Lee pointed blindly toward an emergency shaft behind the control panels. "Maintenance lift, if it still exists." The floor buckled. One of the soldiers vanished into a widening crack without a sound. Voss dragged Kane and Lee toward the shaft as the reactor roared past containment limits. Heat surged, melting ice in violent sheets that refroze instantly as spiral ridges. They reached the shaft. The lift car was gone. The cable hung slack into darkness. "Climb!" Voss ordered. They grabbed the cable and began hauling themselves upward as the room below collapsed into white light and shifting pale mass. The vibration became a scream, not in their ears, in their bones. As they climbed, Voss saw through a break in the shaft wall into the glacier beyond. The spirals were no longer confined to the base. They were racing outward, branching through ancient ice like lightning frozen in motion. The heat pulse from the reactor was traveling through the lattice. The archive was not being destroyed. It was being awakened fully. Above them, the shaft walls cracked. Chunks of ice sheared away, tumbling into the inferno below. Lee slipped. Voss caught his harness, straining. "Go!" she shouted. They climbed. The air grew colder as they ascended, the heat fading, replaced by the raw bite of untouched glacier. At last, they burst through a maintenance hatch into a peripheral tunnel, one that had not yet been overtaken by pale matter. They stumbled forward as the ground beneath them convulsed. Behind them, the lower levels of Project Frostbite imploded. A roar thundered through the ice sheet as structural collapse cascaded downward. The base folded into itself, swallowed by the spiral shaft and the boiling reactor core. Silence followed, not absolute, but vast. Voss lay on the ice, chest heaving, helmet cracked, vision swimming. Lee rolled onto his back, coughing. Kane knelt nearby, staring down at his arm. The frost spirals beneath his suit had stopped spreading, but they had not vanished. Far below, through layers of ice and ruin, something pulsed, once, twice, then steadied. The vibration was different now, broader, wider, not localized to a chamber or a shaft. It hummed through the glacier itself. Voss forced herself to her knees and crawled to a fissure in the tunnel wall. Through it, she could see the Greenland ice sheet stretching endlessly above them, pale blue and silent under polar night. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Then she saw it. Far out across the frozen expanse, thin lines etched themselves into the surface snow in widening arcs. Spirals, dozens of them, hundreds, forming slowly as if drawn by an invisible compass. The heat pulse had not stayed. Underground, it had traveled. The glacier was responding. Lee followed her gaze. "Oh God," he whispered. Kane's voice came soft, almost broken. "It wasn't a prison," he said. "It was dormant infrastructure." Voss felt the weight of that truth settle into her bones. They had not freed a monster. They had powered a system. Project Frostbite's destruction had not sealed the archive. It had completed the circuit. The vibration beneath their boots stabilized into a low, steady thrum that extended beyond the horizon. The entity, no, the method, was awake across a network far larger than the base. Voss pushed herself to her feet. "How long?" Lee asked. She didn't answer immediately. In the distance, one of the surface spirals cracked open, revealing faint pale light beneath the snow. Not explosive, not violent, just inevitable. "Long enough," Voss said finally, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "For the world to feel warm." Kane closed his eyes. The spirals beneath his skin pulsed once, faintly. Not as control, not yet, as memory. Behind them, the remains of Project Frostbite settled into the glacier like a swallowed bone. Ahead of them, the ice sheet breathed, and beneath that breath, something ancient began to circulate heat through a lattice that now reached farther than any map humanity had ever drawn. Captain Alice Voss stood under the endless polar sky and understood with terrible clarity that survival had just acquired a new definition. The archive had awakened, and this time, it would not wait for extinction. Alright, that's tonight's story. Thank you for listening all the way through. Seriously, that means a lot. If you enjoyed it, let me know down in the comments. What part hit you the hardest? Do you think destroying the base made things worse? I read all of them, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. There's a lot more coming. I'll see you in the next one.